welcome to our Parent Transition Support Workshop. Over to you, Eric.
Hi there. Yeah. So just for the people that have just joined, I'm Eric Richardson. I'm the service manager for the transitions team at Wandsworth Children's Services, and I've got a bit of what I'm going to do is to have a bit of a presentation here for you, and then there'll be some time at the end for questions and answers. If you want to put your hand up at any point, I'm happy to sort of answer questions going through it. But you know, I may come up with the answer naturally in the presentation later on anyway. So if you can hold on to the end, but don't worry if you just feel that you need to immediately ask, that's fine. Okay, so what I'm going to do, hopefully this will work by the magic of technology, that you'll be able to see my screen here. Can you guys see that? Can everyone see that?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, is it clear enough? I'll try and zoom in a bit more.
If you do, is it in PowerPoint? You can do slideshow from the current slide so that it's more.
I will try and do that, but whenever I've done that, it means that I don't get to see people's hands going up and things like that.
I can keep an eye on the chat box for hands up.
Okay. So I'll press, and hopefully people will be able to see.
Yep, that's great.
Okay, lovely. So the official term for transitions is preparing for adulthood, because the word transition is used for lots and lots and lots of things, and not just kind of like moving from, you know, kind of like a children's services to adult services. It kind of is often used in social care for you know, people going children or adults moving from school to school to home, for example. So the transition of how they manage kind of like being in one building to another building, for example. So it can, or it also has, you know, terminology used in with young people or adults, again, going through gender realignment and things like that. So it is better if you can use the term preparing for adulthood. That's what when you look at national guidance and things like that, that's kind of like the terminology, if you can remember to do that. But I know a lot of places still use the term transition, just like we still do as well sometimes. Okay, so first of all, just wanted to give you some national context really to what transitions means. So the Care Act came in 2014, and the main 5 kind of big hitting points of that was an emphasis on joint commissioning. That meant joint commissioning between children's and adult services, and between education, health and social care services. It laid out the law regarding personal budgets for carers, and having carers assessments. It laid out what the expectations should be for transitions assessments, so that is preparing for adulthood and young people going from children's services to adult services. It laid out a national eligibility criteria, which is really key, because prior to the Care Act 2014, eligibility criteria for adult social care services was very much locally determined. There was a sort of a rough framework, but each local authority could decide what level of risk they were operating under. So it wasn't very fair in terms of, you know, postcode lotteries and things like that. So there was it introduced a national eligibility criteria, so that if you had your assessment done in Birmingham, you could then go down to Brighton and demonstrate to them that you were eligible for adult social care support. Also importantly in that area is that the general feeling is that that criteria was a very low criteria that had been introduced. So hopefully one of the myths I'm sort of going to be dispelling today is that you have to be kind of like at a severe end of anything to be able to get an adult sort of social care service, really. So since the Care Act came in, implemented in April 2015, the legislation was passed in 2014, that the threshold for having an assessment is very low, and again then for actually finding out if you're eligible or not is still quite low. And the final part of that was about combining education, health and care plans with social care support plans, and that has a link in with the next slide here, in terms of, so that the link across. So the Care Act came in at roughly the same time as the Children and Families Act, also known as the SEN reforms, in 2014. So that was, I'm sure, you know, as parents and professionals, hopefully you've heard about education, health and care plans and the SEN reforms. So the main points were transferring statements of special educational need into education, health and care plans, where it seeks to draw together into one place the work that's happening with the child or young person and adult for as long as they have their plan. Joint commissioning, again, emphasis on joint commissioning across education, health and care. Personal education budgets were introduced. It also became a legal requirement to produce a local offer, which now Ofsted inspect against. So one of the things they look at is, you know, how many hits are you getting on your local offer website? You know, and they're looking at that in terms of, you know, a high level of hits would help you pass your local offer, your inspection, your SEND inspection. And it also has elements in there about preparing for adulthood. And already Charlotte's mentioned about the Year 9 review, EHCP review. So, but we'll go into that a bit more later on. So also in terms of a legal context and legislation context, there's the Mental Capacity Act, which was passed in 2005. And another myth I wanted to dispel about that is that the people often assume that the Mental Capacity Act is about decision making 18-year-olds, and that's not the case. The Mental Capacity Act actually is for 16 and 17-year-olds as well as 18-year-old plus. So from the age of 16, young people are able to make decisions about their own health, welfare, finances, things like that. So just to go through the 5 main principles of the Mental Capacity Act is that capacity is always assumed unless otherwise proven. So everyone has capacity to make decisions unless a capacity assessment has formally actually sort of taken place and shown to be otherwise. People have the right to make unwise decisions. So the Mental Capacity Act is not there to stop people from doing very silly or things that we would consider silly or unusual. Decisions made on behalf of someone who doesn't have capacity, the decision must be made in their best interests. So where a capacity assessment is in place and someone doesn't have capacity, the decision that needs to take place must be in the person's best interests. Best interest decisions should be at least the least restrictive option. So the idea about that is that you don't go to the thing that is going to restrict that person's liberty, or kind of mean that they are going to be restricted in a huge way, and that so that when you're kind of like thinking about best interest decisions, you're building up. So you start with the least restrictive decision, and if that is not working or not having the desired outcome, then you step up your decision making into more and more restrictive options if you need to. And all attempts possible should be sought in supporting a person to make a decision for themselves. So a strong part of that act is about building capacity. So if you've got a young person who you don't think has got capacity to make a certain decision, is part of the act and part of the process of assessing for capacity is that you help that person to understand what the decision might need to be made and the options available and things like that, with the hope that actually you might be able to build their capacity and so that they can still make that decision without having taken that decision out of their hands. Okay, so in terms of nationally, these are the four kind of official preparing for adulthood outcomes. This has been something that the Council for Disabled Children has worked on, and they have they run their own kind of separate website, or they fund their own kind of separate website and support processes and stuff like that on a national level. And they've produced a number of tools and things like that are able to be used. But in terms of looking at this nationally, employment, independent living, community inclusion and health are all kind of aspects that should be considered when you're kind of planning for preparing for adulthood or transition, or going through transition. So that's available. I'll give you the website at the end, hopefully. I think I've got it at the end of here, but I can give it to you if not. And then so there's the kind of like sort of tips on the left hand side there. Personalize your approach. So every transition is individual, just like a person is individual. So the things that they have when they're children, they might not need when they're adults, or they might need to have something very similar. And different needs are supplied by different places. Different needs are met by different places and assessed by different places. So I'll go into that a little bit more later. Nationally, we have to improve post-16 options and support. It is an absolute requirement to raise aspirations and to have high aspirations for young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And planning services together. So coming together and having the conversations together about what needs to happen is really, really important. It shouldn't just be one person sitting down with the young person and doing it from there. It needs to be kind of collaborative. Okay. So this is kind of like what we try and aim to do in Wandsworth, is have early conversations. So as Charlotte said, the Year 9 review at the age of 14 is sort of the time when you formally want to start preparing for adulthood. Even from a very, very young age, you're kind of having you as a parent or carer, you'd be having thoughts about what they might grow up to be and things like that. But the Year 9 review is the time when when you need to put those ideas and plans and what needs to happen down on paper. So the emphasis on good joint working. So that means, as I mentioned earlier, collaborating. So it's the young person, the parents, the schools, health services, children's social workers and social services. Connections, that's no longer that's from an old part of this presentation, I'm afraid. But so that would be like your special needs assessment service, in terms of like you're preparing for adulthood special needs assessment service. So they think about what college options and further education options there might be, those review your Year 9 review, and every review after that are time to agree what options to investigate and what opportunities we need. You need to kind of look at and hone down. And as I said already, raise aspirations. But it's quite important when you're thinking about. So the idea is that you don't really have, when at the Year 9 review, people can get together and start the conversation formally and start to have rough areas of where people of actions and things to investigate. And the idea is that you start with kind of like a sort of a rough outline of how you want things to go and how the transition needs to go. But then in each year following that, in each time that you review that plan, you're honing it down, you're narrowing it down until by the time they get to 18 and 19 and 20, you're getting it more and more specific, so that you have a clearer and clearer idea. Yeah, so we're not expecting people in year 9 to just have the whole exact transition plan with smart outcomes that are, written down and perfect. It is just about starting to draw in and narrow down what needs to happen to get more information. Okay, now we've got that information, maybe in the next one, then you kind of narrow it down even further to find out what you need to do. And I should just mention Sally Gale, who is fantastic. So she is our work right coordinator here at Wandsworth Council. So Wandsworth Council itself tried to offer a lot of opportunities for young people with SEND, and we have had people employed within the council as well. But our main providers in terms of thinking about employment support, so outside of formal education, where you'd be having your school and your college, and there'd be conversations with those people and your special needs assessment caseworkers about employment opportunities and thinking about that. Outside of that, our choice employment support, who are our contracted support provider, and you could once any formal school or college is finished, they can then be kind of in charge of finding support and employment options. One of the good things is once they do find a job opportunity, they then the young person remains open to them, so that they can maintain that job opportunity, which is a critical part. I think is that a lot of employment support providers are just judged by how many jobs they get people, and a lot of the time these jobs might be time limited, so they'll offer something for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, and then the contract is ended and the young person's back to being unemployed again. So they actually support and maintain, they actually provide the support to maintain the employment, even as well, even if they weren't in charge of setting it up. If there are issues with the employment, often things arise, miscommunications, etc. They can be there to support making sure that continues to work. And also, I should mention Share Community. So they do some work formally in terms of they're funded to provide a variety of courses and things like that, education-wise, but also with adult services spot purchase, where there's a particular thing that the young person still wants to work on that maybe isn't included in their EHCP plan, or maybe after their EHCP plan has ceased. So that's just a bit there about employment. But Sally Gale is fantastic, who does who coordinates the work opportunities within the council. So what I'm showing you now is the transition team. So these are all the people in the service that I oversee. So I'll go through the process in a second. But when there has been a referral for a Care Act assessment, for a transition assessment which is in the area of social care, these are the people that will do that work. So we've got an assistant team manager and a duty manager and a duty worker, and then social workers and senior social workers as part of that service, as part of this service. So the process. So I've already mentioned at 14 and having the EHCP review then, and now I'm talking specifically about social care. So if you're thinking that you're thinking that there might need to be, you're looking around at the moment and you think that there's a social care need that a formal service is meeting, then you might want to be thinking about how that looks in adulthood. So one thing that's quite key is that in children's services, a lot of the provision is strategically commissioned by a central kind of place in children's services. So I'm just thinking of examples of that, like Unique Youth, which is our disabled youth service, or Lady Allen Playground, to name a couple. What else? some short breaks connected with Generate, for example. So a lot of those services are for under 18s are commissioned by Children's Services, and they leave it up to those organisations and the parents mostly to self-refer, investigate themselves, and self-refer and start accessing those services and liaise directly with Generate, Lady Allen, Unique Youth, etc. But the way that commissioning works in adult services is very much kind of the opposite. So in adult services, for social care services, nearly every service you need to have a Care Act assessment to be able to access. Nearly every, not all, but nearly every. So in children's services, there's a small team that can do assessments in order to kind of access individualized and bespoke sort of support services. Yeah, there's an assessment that needs to take place, but those are usually only needed for, you know, the most severe end of children with young people with disabilities. And then there's a huge chunk, so something like 700 short breaks support sessions were commissioned are commissioned every quarter by Children's Services, and there's a commissioning officer, etc. for that. But in adult services, virtually all the support that's provided is spot purchased after an assessment takes place. So perhaps at the moment, say if you are accessing, say at the moment you're accessing Generate, and there's your young person is accessing a buddy service from Generate, for example. So they run a great buddy service that's commissioned by Children's Services, but you might need to find out whether or not that is going to be able to continue after they get to 18. And some of the contracts that we have in place actually can run up to 19 as well, and some of them even further actually. But do you see what I mean? That's an example of one of the conversations that you need to kind of check on and see, okay, well, we've got this in place now, and this is working really well, but will this continue, you know, after 18? Is it likely to be needed after 18? Okay, so who do I need to talk to? You know, and you'd have that literally in the plan about who's going to be doing that, having that conversation, and when. And then so that the following year, or when you have another school review, you then discuss that and say, okay, well, actually, we might actually need to have a referral to adult services to be able to allow that continue, to have the assessment, to then allow that service to continue on. So those early conversations should be starting to happen formally at age 40 in the Year 9 review. If at any point in those years you think that yes, you need to have a social care transition assessment under the Care Act, you make a referral to the Adults Access Service. We will screen that, and as I said, the threshold is quite low. What I would say about the threshold for assessment is that it really looks at mental health and disabilities. So a number of special educational needs might not fall into that area. So dyslexia and dyspraxia, for example, might not. But the threshold for assessment is about a confirmed diagnosis of, or mostly a confirmed diagnosis of a disability. So learning disability, physical disability, sensory disability, or mental health issue. So then what will happen is that the case will be allocated to one of the social workers in my service. So we do all of the assessments for every young person, every referral that comes in for every young person under the age of 25. So even if actually you come to your EHCP review when they're 23 and you decide actually that you haven't had any social care service, you haven't felt the need for any of that, but then maybe potentially the plan is going to lapse potentially, and so actually there might be some gaps that you realise that when the formal education stops, there might be some concerns there that social care might need to fill. So it would still be our service, and you'd still go through this process of approaching the access team, and anyone can do that. Can be the young person, can be a parent, can be a carer, can be a professional, yeah, can be a teacher, can do that.
Eric, I was just going to stop you there for a sec.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of comments in the chat box. There we go. So Sharma asked if we could email her these slides afterwards, the presentation.
Yes.
So I said I can email them out to all the attendees. And then there was a comment about that there seems to be quite a gap between what support should be available and then what often happens in practice. And she's asked why do you think that is? So I said that it's a good question, and that I think this is an area which is quickly evolving, and new legislation is being introduced all the time. I think it takes a while to disseminate that information and embed good practice. So, for example, part of the rationale between moving from SEN statements to EHCPs was really to integrate that process a bit more and make it more of a holistic document, so that people's education, health and care needs are considered alongside one another. Because for many sort of young people, particularly with learning disabilities, they're not really distinct categories. All those things feed into one another and are sort of very closely related. So I think obviously that sounds really good in theory, but then in practice, that sort of presented quite a lot of logistical difficulties, which have been challenging. I know from an EP point of view, for example, the SEN Code of Practice kind of changed our remit quite a bit to work up to 25 years. So lots of older EPs who were trained under the old system, sort of pre-2014, maybe they don't have that kind of knowledge and experience of working with young adults. And that's an area that we really need to get upskilled with in terms of our knowledge and how to do those kind of adult assessments and supporting the needs of adults. So yeah, there's quite a few sort of things to consider there, but I think it's presented some challenges for sure for different professionals involved. But the idea behind it is that we're all working more seamlessly together in the interests of young people. Would you agree?
Yes, I think so. And I think so, sitting down and having the conversations about transitions and preparing for adulthood, I'll just emphasize again, we're not expecting, the people sitting at the table to have all of the answers, but the whole idea about starting those conversations early is so that you can refine over a period of time who are the right people and who are the right organizations that you need to draw in, so that you do, but when the critical time comes, that you do actually have the right people connected together, so that it is seamless and it can go through with a very low level of stress.
I think it's worth saying that I have seen some really fantastic transition planning happening. I know some examples of really good practice in the borough where there's been a really individualised, personalised approach, and the young person and their family have felt really well supported and well informed about all the local options that are available, and sort of really clued up and prepared for the process. So I know it is happening. There are pockets of really good practice, and I think it's just about sort of shining a light on that and sort of sharing that really good ways that colleges and schools are doing transition planning really well to help other places that maybe aren't doing so great with it, and parents don't feel that well informed about what's going on, and the young person isn't really very well consulted about their aspirations and their wishes for the future. I think that's so important.
Yeah, definitely. And I do really feel for parents of disabled children and young people, because a lot of families are just trying to get through the day or the week or the month, without something terrible happening, and trying to keep on top of trying to maintain how things are and make sure that things that are happening at the moment are happening smoothly. And that's a challenge. So then having to sort of then at this sort of point start to break out of doing that to try and think a bit further into the future is very difficult. And I really, I really do understand that it is difficult to start thinking in that way. But it is the world of adult services is a very different setup. And so it really will help psychologically to try and start thinking in that way as early as you can.
Yeah, and I think that the current situation obviously makes everything even more challenging, because in our sort of current times of coronavirus and everything else, makes it even more difficult to sort of look to the future, because it does seem so uncertain. So the old sort of systems that you would look to, for example, attending open days for colleges, or, further education options, like lots of colleges aren't doing that at the moment. It's all moved online. Lots of them are offering virtual open days and things like that. So it's worth looking it up. But, it isn't the same to actually go and visit ahead of time, see for yourself, get a feel for the place. It's much harder to do in a virtual way. So I think schools and colleges are trying to adapt and overcome the challenges. But yeah, it does kind of present an extra layer of difficulty for young people and their families. So we absolutely recognise that. It's just one of those things where, everyone's doing all they can. But it is very difficult to recreate that sort of in-person, meeting face to face, seeing where you would be going, what you would be doing, who you'd be with. It is difficult to recreate.
Very difficult. I mean, we have we didn't this year for obvious reasons, but we have an event every year called Get Set Go, which is our transition preparing for adulthood event, where education, health and care providers and advocacy providers and parent groups and young people support groups come together, and every place has stalls that so you can just wander up and have that conversation and say what do you do, but then also kind of like some talks about key things that are kind of happening in the area and in the world of transitions and stuff like that. So we haven't been able to do it. Maybe we will next year, but again, if we do it next year, there's a high chance it will be. I'm sure we will do something next year, but it will be high chance it will be online.
And
so I'll just finish off
around. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say that's usually around April time, isn't it? The transition support fair thing. Yeah, so that's a really good thing to flag up, because perhaps people wouldn't have heard about it, because it does run every year, although we didn't do it last year. So hopefully it will still be running around this Easter time. But go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, bear with me about technology and things like that. Hold on. No, this isn't gonna. Hold on. Share. Okay, and then I hit. What do I hit? I hit that one there. Right. Hopefully you can. Oh, it started right near the beginning. Let's just push that through. So we were here. So someone from my team will be allocated to do an assessment, and this can take place. You can make the referral, as I said, at any time from 14. If you feel that you're really sure that you're going to need a Care Act assessment and a transition assessment for social care services, you can make that referral. We probably wouldn't allocate it at 14 unless the situation was kind of quite complicated, but we would still accept the referral and put it on our list for allocation at a later sort of time. So we would do someone would do the Care Act eligibility assessment. In the terminology, it's transition assessment in the Care Act. That is technically no different to so when I mentioned the national eligibility criteria for the Care Act, it doesn't matter what age you are, that is the national eligibility criteria. But what the transition is, the only way that a transition assessment is different is that it can happen before the young person reaches 18 with with the anticipation of what the needs might be when they hit 18. So you're planning and support plan, you're assessing and planning for that point after they hit 18. So we have social workers that are allocated 2 or 3 years before they turn 18. They'll do the assessment, they'll do the support plan, they'll apply for funding for that, you know, way in advance of their 18th birthday in some cases, so that it's all set up and ready for that person's 18th birthday. So the emphasis is, though, that they are doing that work in getting ready for that person's 18th birthday, that young person's 18th birthday. So they wouldn't have any case responsibility for meeting any needs before the 18th birthday. They're working specifically for making sure everything is in place for the 18th birthday. So if there are issues arising now that require social work input, you feel, or social care input, that would be making a referral to Children's Services and to MASH, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, where things get, or to your Early Help Hub, in fact. So yeah, I kind of skipped ahead a little bit there. So you'd have the eligibility assessment if it's agreed that you need an assessment. Then the social worker would work with you on the transition plan in terms of what services might they need if the assessment showed they were eligible. And you'd be trying to focus creatively on those pathways that we mentioned earlier in terms of community inclusion, health, you know, and those. I've forgotten the other two now, but yeah. So, and the idea is to have the support plan ready by the 18th birthday, and often we would remain involved. Like the social worker would often stay involved if they're at a specialist residential college, because that usually often means that once they come out of residential college, the young person doesn't often return home at that point. Then, you know, they might be ready to be able to go into a residential care or supported living, or potentially, in fact, their own, you know, independent accommodation with floating support kind of going in. And so we would continue to remain involved anyway, and be the involved service. So after all the assessments put in place, the support plans put in place, we would then review annually alongside your EHCP reviews. But if there are no particular issues, we would place the case on a care package review system, so that we would do that every year. But then we have our duty service to respond if there are any issues that can't be dealt with, that need to be kind of like, you know, more urgently dealt with than at the next annual review. And then finally, we would transfer to a longer term team at 25. So if the needs are stable and being met, we would just hand the next annual review over to that appropriate adult team. So if they've got a learning disability or autism, it would be the learning disability team. If they had a physical disability, it would be the locality team. If they had a mental health issue, it would be the mental health team. Yeah, so that's what we do. So in terms of our transition team, we're a generic team. So we assess. You know, if they're under 25, we assess, and they need a care assessment, we assess. There's no kind of trying to figure out which team it goes to and things like that. We would need to do that at the age of 25 if they've still got you know, a support plan from the council. So this is some other further sources of information, and I can see, yeah, I didn't put it on here, so I'll have to send that to you. I'll send these slides anyway, but I will also send the Preparing for Adulthood link to that website, the national website, which is fantastic. So the Family Information Service, that is actually now called Wandsworth Information Advice and Support Service, WIAS. So apologies for that, actually. I need to update that. I'll update that before I send it to you. So they're the people that you would approach in terms of issues with the education side of the HCP plan. and oh no, I've got it there. I've got Wandsworth Information Advice and Support Service there, so it's more update to what I thought it was. The Family Information Service is the children's local offer, is part of the children's local offer. So and they're the online resource base, basically. They're online for all children and young people, and they also run the Disabled Children's Register, which enables you to get the One Card and the One Card Plus. So that's for 19-year-old plus, if you still feel that you need the One Card. And there's the Adult Care Information Service. So I mentioned already the local offer, which is all of the information, advice, support agencies and local government guidance and policies and things. That's the local offer for children's services, and that goes up to 25. Then there's the Adult Care Information Services, which starts at 18. So there's that sort of 7-year crossover period where all of those services that are pertinent for transition years should also appear in the Adult Care Information Service. And they work closely together to make sure they have the same information on those in the area for the areas of transition and for the services for transition. This is some sort of further reading here. Oh, there, I have got the Preparing for Adulthood website. There you are. This is excellent. I would recommend going to that website in particular. It is obviously a national kind of view and practice, but we would definitely follow all of that locally. And so we have a local transition guide, which is called Preparing for Adulthood, a Guide to Transition in Wandsworth. That is a very, very old document, I don't mind telling you, and desperately needs to be updated. So there is currently a project being led by the Adult Services Director, Liz Bruce, and we are looking to completely update and rejuvenate our transition policy, basically, so that we should have the draft of that set by the end of January, and definitely in place by I would say spring next year, as long as we can get everyone signed up to it. But for now, Preparing for Adulthood, a Guide to Transition in Wandsworth is on the local offer. If you go to the Wandsworth local offer website, you can type in Preparing for Adulthood Wandsworth in Google, and it should actually come up as the first or second option. There's the Care Act guidance, obviously great bedtime reading. But the particular chapter in the guidance about transition is section 16, and it is actually quite an okay read. It's not in legalese, it's not the Act itself, it's the guidance for the Act. So I really would recommend just chapter 16. In the Care Act guidance, you can find that online quite easily as well. Children and Families Act. Again, I mean, that is quite an extensive act, but it does have sections in there about social care, and in the Council for Disabled Children's websites, they have a lot of really good information and resources about the Children and Families Act. The Mental Capacity Act. I mean, our local advocacy provider is Voiceability, and they will be able to give you kind of like some sort of Mental Capacity Act friendly information, really, rather than kind of like looking individually at the Act itself. So Voiceability are good to have sort of discussions or to give you sort of resources and things like that. And I've already mentioned as well the Preparing for Adulthood website, that is fantastic. So now's the time for questions and answers.
I was just going to say in the chat there is. Sharma said, is the referrals process a national thing or just specific for Wandsworth? I think, yeah.
So different. So although the eligibility criteria, hello Sharma, though the eligibility criteria is national, and absolutely, of course, the timings as well are national, like when you can make those referrals and things like that. The name of the organisation or the name of the team that you that you approach might be difficult, different and difficult, different. So in Wandsworth, it's part of Wandsworth Adult Social Services, and the team is called the Access Team, and that's what we commonly refer to as the front door. So if you go to, you know, if you move to Devon, I think Virgin run their adult care services. So they would have, might not be the local authority that you approach. It might be Virgin Adult Services for Devon or whatever. You know, different local authorities arrange their stuff in different ways, but the process should be the same in terms of if someone feels that they need a social care act transition assessment at any point after 14, leading up to their 18th birthday, or indeed after their 18th birthday, it would be the front door, you know, that local authority's front door. So you'd have to kind of like do a little bit it shouldn't take you a couple of minutes on Google to try and work out where the front door is. And there's been a conscious effort by children's and adult services across the country to have one kind of entry point. So you're not getting passed around lots of places. You're hopefully just going to one place. You tell them the situation, and they should be handing it then to the correct kind of team, whoever's going to take that forward. So I know in other boroughs they have transitions. So if the young person has a learning disability or autism, the adults learning disability team will do that assessment and that work. Or if they have a physical disability, there'll be a physical disability team, for example. So in Wandsworth, we've decided to have a transition team where we deal with all Care Act, as long as they're under 25, we deal with all of those assessments across the board. So there's no kind of confusion about kind of which team you need to go to or who does what. So I think it works reasonably well, but it does mean that the social workers have to be quite skilled across a range of areas.
Absolutely.
A number of our, you know, I mean, I would say kind of like, you know, 4 out of 5 of our referrals are learning disability and autism, you know, related. But we do have, sort of, you know, one in 10 might have a mental health, might be their primary diagnosis. 1 in 10 might have a physical disability, Duchenne's or something, you know, multiple sclerosis, you know, potentially.
Yeah, and she's also asked, is the eligibility assessment available to the public?
Yes, it is. It's in the Care Act guidance. So different local authorities might design their forms differently, but the absolute principles are there, which every local authority must follow. So if you typed in Care Act eligibility, you'd probably get something like into Google. You'd probably get something from like the Social Care Institute for Excellence, for example, and that kind of really clearly lays it out. But it's a 3-stage process that they go through basically. The first one is, you know, have you got a disability or mental health issue? You know, is you know the first test. The second one is there's 10 eligibility outcomes. So they are, I'm not going to be able to remember to list them all, but they're things like, can the person go to the toilet by themselves? Can the person stay at home by themselves safely?
No, that's fine. Sorry, I know about that one because I actually run professional training courses on care assessments. Okay. I was referring to the transitions. Sorry, I didn't make that clear in what I was asking. So, you know, when someone comes through to the transition, I didn't realise it was just the care assessment itself.
Yes, yeah.
That's fine. That's great, thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. And the reason why I think a lot of transitions are complicated is that, as I mentioned earlier, the same kind of work area. So if you think about education, health and care are the main kind of work areas, education, health and care. It might be in adult services that adult social care might be meeting an education need that was previously met by education and children's services. So you get this kind of crossing over sometimes of, so for example, in the world of mental health, so you might be, as a young person, you might be receiving a service from CAMS, and you get to 17 years old and or you get very close to your 18th birthday, and CAM say you don't reach the criteria for the adults equivalent, which would be a community mental health team, but actually in the college you're going to, they have a CAMS commissioned person where you'll be able to still receive CBT sessions and talking therapies, as part of your college provision. So it's education then transfer, not having to, but that's the identified kind of provision within education. So, and the same goes across social care to health. You can plot it basically between that. So those are some of the reasons why you need to think early. It's not always going to be simple that, okay, the school's doing this, so in adult services, is the college going to be doing this? It might not do, Same, for example, like with the other way around in terms of occupational therapy. A lot of schools, special schools certainly provide occupational therapy. They have occupational therapy in schools. If you go to a college, that college might not have occupational therapy attached to it, and you might have to then go to the local health service to be able to meet occupational therapy needs. To be out, do you see what I mean? So that's the reason why I think people think it's difficult, is because there's the assumption that it's always going to be, okay, an education service in adults, that's going to be an education service. Health in children's services is going to be health in adult services, and it isn't. They cross over, and that's why you need to kind of make sure that you're planning for that and taking that into account and making those inquiries. Yeah.
So when you guys do your transition stuff, sorry, and it's easy to ask you the questions because our transitions team aren't as open. Right. Do you do anything around, other than this, which is great, around supporting the parents with understanding what's about to happen? Because so many parents have the issue with consent, which it's heartbreaking for the parent. They fought every single day for 18 years or 16 years to make sure their child is protected and supported, and then they're not told what's going on a lot. Well, that's in my area, not to say it is in your area, so I'm questioning you, but it's not about you. Sorry if that's how it's coming across. The support that goes into helping the parents understand capacity and consent, but also we have a lot of people who don't necessarily get the support when they're 14, 15, because they might be able autistic young people. They don't actually even get an EHCP plan, so they're not on the council's books, and the councils have no idea who is autistic and who isn't in their local areas. And then I get them when they're 19, 20, and the parents and the young person is at crisis point. That's what I was asking about, the eligibility. Can I then refer them into like a tilt team or a transitions team, whatever you guys? So I work for 3 local authorities as well, so I'm commissioned for all 3. And they all have to do it differently just to make my life easier, even though we're the smallest county in the country.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I'd be quite surprised if a young person that had autism didn't have some kind of extra support needs at school at some point, or potentially an EHCP. I mean, I know the threshold is applied differently for EHCPs, which it probably shouldn't, but is applied a bit differently across different local authorities and things, which makes it complicated. But I mean, as part of the Care Act assessment stuff, the very, very actual first thing that we would do is check with the young person. Do you want someone to help you with your assessment? And there's a kind of a mini sort of assessment just built into the preparation for the assessment, so it does, and then that gives the young person clear opportunity to say, yes, my parents, and from then on we don't keep asking continually. And if they were to turn around and say, I don't want you to tell my parents anymore, then we would honour that. So there is a little, and it's not quite in the Care Act, it's not quite formally a mental capacity assessment, but it follows along similar principles of checking. So if the young person doesn't have capacity to be able to kind of give their view about their needs in the assessment, then the best interest is usually defaulted to the parent to be able to, the best interest decision would be to ask the parent, and that's kind of like the default process, unless there's some reason why there is going to be like a conflict of interest anyway. So, I mean, we've looked after young people approaching 18, and they've been in care for the last 3 or 4 years of their life. They've got a disability. The last thing they want is for anyone contacting their parents. They don't want their parents involved in their in their future care and stuff like that. Some of them very much do, but some of them very much don't. And so we might make a decision at that point, especially if they didn't have capacity and therefore looked after child approaching 18. We would kind of like, part of that start of that, preparing for that assessment work, we'd be thinking, well, they were taken into care, so there's an issue there. So we wouldn't automatically kind of start asking the carer about what their needs are, their parent about what their needs are. We'd be really asking their foster carer or their the residential home key worker or their children's social worker, rather than the parent.
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the sort of things we're able to offer through our service is a path, which is a sort of individualized, personalized transition sort of planning type session with the young person, where they sort of specify and dictate a circle of adults around them to support them and help them with decision making and things like that. And that's up to them. So if they put forward their parents to be a part of that, then absolutely they can be. But sometimes they'll choose, other people, siblings, close friends, teachers at school, anybody who they feel knows them well and knows their interests and their needs and their difficulties, strengths, aspirations, anyone that can be consulted to give more sort of advice around that or direction to the conversation. And then we would literally be sort of doing a brainstorming type session with all those key people that the young person participates with also, if they're able to give their views. And then we sort of flesh out some actual goals, some tangible steps to help break down those longer term goals. So the longer term goal might be, I want to be a pilot. Okay, so how do we get there? What do we need to do? What courses do you need to look to enroll on, etc., and sort of break it down like that. So that's something that we're able to offer for free, and we're sort of experimenting at the moment with doing that virtually, and then you get a graphic recording of all the kind of keywords and little illustrations of the different goals and breakdowns as well. It's quite nice as a record of the conversation. I know lots of EP services do also offer that as well, if the schools want to commission that as part of their EP work. I should also say I've typed in the chat there that Eric mentioned the wand card, and that's kind of our register of disabled children in the borough. Every local authority should have an equivalent of the wand card. So I know, for example, in Merton, there's an M card, but it's basically the same thing. It's for children with disabilities or special needs, including autism. It's like an entitlement to certain services and such, like an access type thing, and you can get special deals and money off things, or special times you can access certain places, like quieter hours and stuff like that. So that's worth looking up based on where you're located. There should be some kind of equivalent for that. Is there any other questions? Feel free to unmute if you want to just leap in and ask, or you can type it into the chat. That's absolutely fine. Andrew, did you have any questions?
Hi.
Hey.
It was it was really helpful. Thank you, Eric. It's not exactly a question necessarily, maybe more of an observation. And I think Eric obviously is coming from this very much from a social care viewpoint, and as he was saying earlier, the young people that generally come through, not exclusively, but would, in relation to their autism, would also have a learning disability. One of the things that's cropped up from working a number of years in mainstream schools is that there can be a gap for young people with maybe more what might be characterised as sort of at the Asperger's high functioning end of autism, who often don't have any HCP, because they don't necessarily meet the educational criteria involved in that, and so but may well have problems that make that transition to adulthood rather different for them than it would be for a neurotypical child. So that's something that we've worked on over the years, perhaps. I think you can argue about resourcing and communication, but I think there's a fairly well plotted pathway in some ways for young people, that Eric comes into contact with. Young people without that, almost the families sort of feel quite left adrift, as though they've got to, there's a bit of a cliff edge there and they're not quite sure what to do, and they don't feel like there's much support for them. I haven't got a load of answers to that. We've done pilot studies in the past and produced little, films and documentaries, and I think it's got a bit better as a result of some of the work that we've done. But I do still think it's maybe a little bit of work needs to be done overall, and hopefully at WAS we fill that gap a little bit. So I told you it wasn't going to be very edifying, my
yeah, I would agree, Andrew. I would agree that there is there is a lot of our young people that we work with. Some of them are incredibly academically able, for example, accessing degrees, university courses, going on to study, astrophysics or biochemical engineering, things that I know nothing about. They really are exceptionally gifted academically, but they still have those difficulties with the social interaction skills, making friends, all those kind of independent living tasks, which are going to come into play when they move away and go to university. And I don't think mainstream settings are that great in sort of upskilling our young people to face those independence challenges, and that's especially pertinent for our young adults with autism. An 18-year-old who's very, very able but has never lived away from home before, and all of a sudden they need to manage money, they need to cook their own meals, and they're faced with this sort of labyrinth of hurdles when it comes to moving into halls of residence, making friends, socializing, all that stuff that's new and difficult for all 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and young adults, not just our young people with autism. But I do think that is an area that we need to look at providing more support around, and sort of thinking about how we do that.
I think every year we get a handful of young people who need support when they're at university, undergraduate, master's degree, and things like that. And I think from my experience in terms of like universities, it depends on the university. Sometimes we've actually gone through the assessment process, and we've sort of looked to try and we've looked at sort of locally. So we had a young person go to Oxford not long ago, and he was really worried about being able to navigate actually just getting around to different places in the city. So we then kind of like we're looking at support planning to be able to get him a travel buddy for a few months, so that he could sort of name the kind of places that he wanted to go to, and then they would learn the routes together, and then stop the work. But actually, we were in the middle of purchasing that, and the college, the university turned around and said, no, we're gonna put someone to do that. We're gonna do, even though it's nothing. It wasn't really to access the library. I mean, they do that anyway. I think most universities, but it was about social thing. Where do I go? Where are the bars, or where's swimming? Where's the gym? And things like that. So he was very worried about that, and he was able to learn it, but he needed someone to show him a few times, in the local, how you use buses and things like that, local stuff. So and I think, the advice I give for young people, specifically, with autism, that are looking around at universities, is it does depend on the university, and that you would, you have to consider your own needs. Unfortunately, this isn't, in ideally, every university should be able to be adaptive, to be able to be providing the right level of support, to young people, whether it's, on a social level or an education level or, in a health level, to make sure that can be in place. But sadly, it isn't sometimes, and you have to kind of consider those things in when you're looking around at, colleges. Like we've got, young person going to some of the very old universities in London, and he's in a wheelchair, and it's going to be difficult for you to get around. And that is the absolute factor that some of these buildings are really old. There's no way of adapting them with lifts and stuff like that. And the fact of life, I would rather not have that situation, but that's how it really is, and you have to just take that into account when you're looking around. And again, goes back to the early looking around. Is this a sort of place that how autism friendly is this place? But when it get in the world of SEN, after the college level, it is down to universities mostly to be able to be in charge of doing that themselves, rather than the support of local authorities. So there is a bit of variation there.
Yeah, I think you're right that I've seen a real wide variety in terms of how well equipped universities themselves are to provide those support services, because I know some young people who've had really fantastic experiences and other people really not so much. And I think one of the hurdles that you potentially have to overcome as a young person with autism is that it's down to you to register with those student support services. I don't know, maybe some people do reach out and suggest it, but I know on the whole, it's very much down to you have to go yourself and seek out those services and actually register with them. I have autism. These are the types of difficulties that I need support with. And then they can start to put those things in place and look at what support can be provided. But it's very much dependent on you being quite proactive about that. Stacey's just written in the chat box, Edge Hill University have gone all out for my son to become independent. Wow, so they're doing a really good job of supporting him. And Rachel has said, can you give some examples of social care support that may actually be provided to someone with autism on the higher functioning end of the spectrum? I come across a lot of families who, once their child leaves full-time education, have no support really. This often leaves the autistic person and their parent very isolated and worried about the future.
Classic one is support to access social community groups. So that is a very common one that we deliver to people that have autism, don't have particular learning disability as such, but have autism, have a lot of difficulty engaging with friendship groups and things like that. So support buddies, outreach providers. The organisation that we would most within the borough, I mean, if they're going to a university and they're in halls and stuff like that, we would have to sort of look at the local provision there of what providers might be around or whatever. But locally here, Generate are fantastic for as an organisation in providing buddies in that way, and we have a number of people that have 3, 4, 5 hours a week of support with Generate, because it's helping them even get out the door sometimes. Because after kind of like a formal education thing has sort of ended, and there's no structure anymore, they haven't been able to get a job possibly, and so it then the world becomes a very big place all of a sudden, and just helping people get out the door and go out and do some things for themselves and access some things that they're interested in, go to a football match, go to the cinema, and there's a lot of social anxiety for a lot of people doing these things. So that is something that we have we do put in fairly frequently enough. I mean, we are really hoping if they go to somewhere like a college or university, they would build up a friendship base as part of that, and those friendships will continue on. You know, if they have gone to sort of like a college or university kind of situation. But sometimes it might even be helping, it might be a temporary sort of support package for 3 months in helping them just to maintain a routine of seeing their friends that they've actually made at college or whatever, and now instigating a social contact and setting up maybe a regular time that they go and have coffee, or they go and to a football match, or they go and have a meal somewhere or something like that. It might, just getting an adult support package, it doesn't have to be forever.
Sorry, I've just had a look at their website. They look very LD led. So is there anything that's available for those that are more able? Because sometimes by putting someone in who is an able autistic adult into those groups can actually be more debilitating to them, because those groups aren't right for them. So I'm just looking at the website just to see what is available, because we do have someone coming up to university in your local area, and part of our role is to support them with finding the right support. So just what you've mentioned it, because I thought, oh, fantastic, I can refer them to there, and I've just looked and gone, no, I can't.
What I would say actually is that, this is sort of slightly cheating, but the one thing is, unfortunately, we commissioned Generate to do a piece of work that was targeting specifically a social group for young people with Asperger's and sort of like no learning disability, high function autism kind of types, and it was really difficult, and it failed, unfortunately. No fault of Generate at all, but the nature of the beast, unfortunately, was very difficult. But what they have done in Richmond, so for a lot of you might know that Wandsworth and Richmond services, particularly adult services, are joined. We're in a shared staffing arrangement, and we have actually got agreements that all of the services that are available in Richmond are also available in Wandsworth as well. So actually, Richmond's autism, like they've got, I've been to a couple of them. There's I can't remember what they're called now. I'll have to get that to you. It was a little while ago when I went there, but they have two groups aimed at young people with autism and young adults with autism. They meet in Twickenham every other week, or they did prior to lockdown. I can't remember if it's Resources for Autism or the National Autistic Society or someone else that runs it. But they get a grant from Richmond Council to run it there. But we've had the agreement that if there's anyone in Wandsworth that wants to access that, that's absolutely fine for them to go there. So they're quite an established group that, as I say, do meet. They could do a boat trip. They go out for meals. They just have support groups as well, where you're sitting there and talking about your what might be happening for you that week. So those are sort of more established groups that people can go along to, and that we have access to, but we haven't been able to set up one particularly for Wandsworth, unfortunately.
I think that's a really good point, though, that it is very much, you have to kind of get a feel for these different organisations and what's available locally, because it really does vary from borough to borough. Like, for example, I know in Kingston MenCap run like youth services, so youth clubs for young adults with learning disabilities. I actually used to be the club leader of that, Future Friends it's called. That's moved online now, but yeah, that would be a mixture of young people with learning disabilities, so some of whom have autism, others not. And I think it really does depend. So for example, young people themselves, how they think about their autism. Some young people think of it as a disability and other people very much don't. It's a very personal thing. And equally, if they want to hang around and make friends with other young people with autism, or they don't. Somebody, Stacey, has typed into the chat that her sons wouldn't access a group because they want to feel normal, as they put it. So that's the classic example, that you can have all these great support services out there, but if the young person themselves doesn't want to identify that way, doesn't really feel at home in that type of a friendship group, then they're not gonna access it. Something we haven't really touched on today is supported employment programs, and that's sort of one of my areas of special interest. So where we are, we have a supported employment program called Project Search, and there's a few different outlets throughout the country. It's an American thing that's been brought over to the UK, and it's run with a partnership organisation. So the local sort of special school for moderate learning difficulties, they recruit like about 5 people from their 6th form every year, go onto it. And the local partnership organisation is St George's NHS Foundation Trust. So it lasts for 1 academic year, and they rotate across 3 different placements in the trust. So they'll do like a term serving food in the cafeteria, then they'll do the next term sterilising the operating equipment, and then they'll do another term in the post room or something like that. So they get a feel of 3 different sort of placements. And the great thing about that programme is that it's run, they get input from an SEN teacher. So half the day is split into functional English and math skills, and then the other half of the day is their work placement, like hands-on. And that seems to have got really good feedback and reviews from people who've been through the programme. I know at Cricket Green School last year, out of the 5 18-year-olds who took part in it, 4 of them were actually offered paid employment at the end of the programme. So yeah, there is these schemes out there which kind of offer a bit of a bridge into the sort of working world, if you like. It's sort of half and half, like a bit college-like and a bit job-like. And then, yeah, kind of break it down a bit, make it less daunting and less intimidating. And they also get like a mentor who works on them and monitors their progress on the work placement side. So yeah, that's one really good scheme that's out there, worth looking up, Project Search, because they have a couple of different localities around in the UK. But yeah, I think it really is a case of just digging about what's available in the local area, isn't it? It really
I would also, in terms of like the comment about accessing mainstream, sort of activities groups, things like that. Sorry, someone's calling me. Is so another kind of thing that a support worker could do for a period of time, a targeted period of time, if they had their Care Act assessment and funding was agreed, is that it could be to help research and then connect to and even continue attending with, if needed, a mainstream group. Like, so if someone was into rowing, for example, and they wanted to, that's their interest, and they have autism. And they find the whole business of being able to leave and travel there and be part of the group and support social interaction with the group when rowing and things like that. That could be something, that could be a piece of work that could happen. So it doesn't necessarily, obviously, in an ideal world, organisations should be making allowances and should be making reasonable adjustments, right? But we know, that there's a certain extent, a lot of these organisations are fairly small and things like that. So, they might not have the resources to provide, a worker or a person to individually focus on making sure that that person's okay. And that's where sort of like the local authority might step in and might be useful to be able to sort of support something like that, either for a period of a few months or even ongoing if they still aren't able to do that once the kind of connection's been set up. So I would, so that's something else I would potentially sort of suggest. Absolutely, I get it in terms of they don't want to be late, they don't want to be labelled in with a special group and going along to a special place and whatever just because of my disability. So that's something else that I would consider as perfectly fine, in terms of like a piece of work that social care could help with.
I think it's that tension, isn't it, between what people want and what they need. So a lot of young people in school say they don't want a learning support assistant because it singles them out and then they feel different to their peers. But it might be that they do need extra help with their learning. So how to sort of manage that conflict is tricky, and that continues on into adulthood. So they may not want to be singled out. They don't want their disability to be highlighted to others, and yet they do need extra support across certain areas. So just about consulting them, coming up with a plan together, helping to manage that a bit more, I think. Did you have any other questions, Stacey or Rachel? No? Okay. Sharma, did you have any more questions? No? Okay, brilliant. Well, in that case, thank you very much, Eric. That was really helpful. And I hope you found it useful, everyone who's attended. And yes, as I said, we will endeavour to email out those slides. And I'll also send you an article I wrote about supported employment programmes that you might find useful as well. Yeah, so I hope that was useful. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming. Thank you, Eric.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.